Monorepo or multi-repo? That's the question that you have to answer at the beginning of every project. And whether you want to orchestrate a set of individual repositories on one side or just put all your code within the same monorepo with the proper tooling and module encapsulation and so on, the answer is definitive. Definitive. Usually. You don't want to just jump between one another because the migration tends to be really expensive. So even if you do it, that's something that usually happens once in the lifetime of a project. So what if I told you there is a third hidden option here? One that just allows you to go multi-repo or monorepo or heck, no repo at all. And even better, it lets you move from one type to the other very easily. Yeah, in this video, we're going to talk about Bit. So let's go. As an example here, I'm going to be using this very basic form application built around Bit components. This is actually an article submission form that I took from the Bits and Pieces publication. This is the app they use to receive article submissions for their Medium publication. This application actually consists of 3 parts: a full design system with multiple packages of UI components, the actual article submission app, which is implemented using React, and a Lambda serverless function. Now, I'm going to show you how you can go from a single monorepo containing all this entire project into a multi-repo scenario by exporting these components to just go back and forth and essentially orchestrate your project and the way your different teams work within it however you want. So let's go. Let's start with the monorepo version of this project. Let me show you what that looks like in code. As you can see here, the project itself is cloned on my local environment. I have the article submission folder where that holds the entire application, and I have the app itself, which in Bit is a component, and then I have entities, form elements, and even handling functions and so on. I'm not going to go deep into what every piece of code does because we don't really care about this at the moment. So what I want to do is show you how you can pick and choose different sections of your monorepo and turn them into individual repositories, essentially. For that process, we're going to grab a component, export it, and eject it at the same time, which will remove it from my code base, but it will leave it inside the Node modules folder, so the project itself can still function without the code being part of the code base, essentially. And then I'm going to show you how you can grab this new component that you created and import it into a different project so you can keep maintaining it, effectively moving it into its own repository. So for that, I'm going to grab the component called article submission scheme, which is inside the entities folder. And this simply, as you can see here, it contains the scheme for the data type that the application uses. And I'm going to, again, tag it, export it, and eject it. Thanks to the export command, your component is now available within a remote scope, which is essentially a remote hosting for Bit components. Now we're going to create essentially a brand new repository, initialize it with Bit, and then import the new component into it so that we can use it. Another small detail to mention is that whenever you export a component, by default, Bit will use its CI called Ripple CI, and it will build the component brand new individually in the cloud to make sure that everything works and is ready to be imported somewhere else. This is the default CI, but you can configure any other CI environment that you want manually through the configuration files. In this video, we're not going to go into details, but I'll go into more details about how Ripple CI works in future videos. Now, all you need to know is that, as you can see on screen, Bit is individually building our submission scheme component, and it's keeping track of everything, of every build and every version, so that we can tell what this component is using and eventually who might be using it within the same project. Right, so now I have a brand new repository on the left side here called BNP Form Submission Scheme Repo, and then on the right I have my terminal. I'm going to use the bit import command, as I mentioned before, because the bit import command allows me to download my component and then have the code available for me to maintain it. All right, so this is a brand new project, and I just imported the component. That means I have all the code required here, and it's essentially nothing else, just not modules for whatever dependencies this component might have. But I have the code here if I even wanted to change it, modify it, and then push it. Now let's just push it up into the new repo to have the separation process finalized. And now I'm just gonna refresh my GitHub repo. And as you can see, the extraction process is complete. From now on, this particular component is an independent component being maintained as part of an independent repo. So that means we've gone from a monorepo setup into a multi-repo, at least for one component. But we can repeat this. We can keep exporting and ejecting each component that we want to maintain separately until we have the multi-repo setup that we want. So now let's go the other way around and think how we could potentially go from a multi-repo setup into a monorepo one. All right, now with the previous setup, you successfully managed to move from a monorepo setup where you had all your teams working within the same, essentially within the same folder, within the same GitHub repository, into a multi-repo one. For as many components as you needed, you were able to extract those individual components into individual repos, allowing individual teams to work on them and really only worry about them. Now let's go the other way. Let's imagine you have a multi-repo setup already, but the orchestration for that multi-repo is really it's becoming really expensive. The interdependencies between them are just getting out of hand, and really the communication with your teams and the interaction with your teams, it's suffering because of this. So you would really want to go the monorepo way, or at least merge some of these individual repos into a single one. So I'm going to show you how you can do that, following essentially the same steps we saw before. So here we have three different repos that I want to show you. So on the left side, you have two individual repos. At the bottom left corner, we have the one we created in the previous step, the scheme individual component. We had extracted that originally into an individual repo, and I went ahead and did the same for the form component, which is here on the upper left corner. These two are essentially very similar repos because they have a single component from our application. And what I want to do now is merge them into the repo, the empty repo on the right. So I just created an empty repo here, and the idea is to move this from the left into the right, and from now on have my teams that work on the scheme and on the form component just use the same repository. And as you can probably imagine, the steps for this are essentially the same. We go to each of these individual repositories and we'll make sure to export the latest version of these components with the option of also ejecting them. Now, why is it optional? Because now we have an individual repository for these components. So it's not like before where we had a full project with the monorepo that needed to continue working after we had removed the code. So in that case, the eject command would make sure that the dependencies were still correct after we removed the actual code from a component. But now we have these individual repositories that we just want to remove. We just want to get rid of them. So now we've successfully managed to import both components into the same folder on my local environment. So I have here the original article submission scheme, and I also have the form component here. Now, I don't care about the code. Let's now make sure that they all live on the same repo just by pushing the code up. All right, now we have successfully uploaded the code. On the right side, you see the new monorepo on the right, having the code for both components, the scheme within the entities folder and the form component as well, which were initially handled on the left individually, are now handled as a single monorepo where my teams could potentially just use for their activities. Let's now look at one final setup that we can achieve with Bit, and that is the no repo at all, essentially. The last option here is not having a repo at all. And how does that work? Where are we putting our code then? The fact of the matter is that Bit allows you to version control your components individually and autonomously. That means essentially that your components are hosted on a remote scope and they're not really tied to any particular repository, which in turn allows you to import them and maintain them from within whatever repository you want, which is essentially what we're seeing here. For example, here I have on Bit.cloud, my own organization, I have the two components I've been dealing with, the article submission form and the article submission scheme. Every time I was doing Bit export, the code was being pushed here into the submission form scope. And really, if I wanted to just get rid of my repos, I could simply just remove them from GitHub and my code will still be living here. So essentially, Bit is letting me do everything I need from a code orchestration or code collaboration point of view. I could have multiple teams committing and pushing new components or maintaining components within the same scope of my organization without the need of GitHub at all. So that's one of the major benefits of Bit, in my opinion, that it lets you handle your components individually without really worrying about whether you're doing a monorepo or a multi-repo setup. In the end, we went from a monorepo to a multi-repo setup and then back, and then just got rid of all the repositories without really losing any code and without really losing the ability to collaborate with other teams. So you can say that Bit gives you a lot of flexibility in that regard. Now, the question I ask you is, what is your favorite software development strategy? Is it multi-repo or monorepo? And the key to remember is that with Bit, that decision doesn't have to be definitive. So before I leave, just remember that on the comment section, I'll make sure to link to articles and documentation sections of Bit in case you want to learn more about this tool. And if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more information and more videos like it. Until then, see you next one. Bye.